It's time for another edition of Lewis at Large, 60 minutes of smart talk radio featuring guests from all walks of life in conversation with your host, Warner Lewis. So sit back and lend us your ears for the next hour. Now here with today's first guest is the host of Lewis at Large, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck, and of course that means some smart talk radio is in your future, and we are extremely pleased to have this segment. Janine Shepherd, she is the author of Defiant: A Broken Body is Not a Broken Person. An extremely extraordinary work. Let me tell you a little bit about her, and then we'll let her speak for herself. She's an inspirational speaker and writer. Books Never Tell Me Never and The Gift of Acceptance become classics in the survivor genre. She is a pilot and aerobatics instructor as well as a mother of 3 kids. She was awarded the Order of Australia, the nation's highest honor, for her service to the community, her inspiration, and her work in raising awareness of spinal cord research. You have heard her on TEDx Talks. You have seen her on 60 Minutes, CNN, and much, much more. Fascinating story indeed. Janine, how are you, my friend?
I'm wonderful, thank you, Warner. How are you today?
Well, we're doing quite well here in the Midwest, and very pleased to have you on. Let's talk a little bit, give our Lewis at Large listeners a little bit more depth here, and the setup for this new work, Defiant: A Broken Body is Not a Broken Person.
Right. Well, I have to say that my heart, I have a very special place in my heart for where you're located, because that is where I actually gave my TED Talk, in Kansas City.
Really? Good for you. Wonderful. Right, I'm just making sure that you can hear me okay. Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. So again, if you could, tell us a little bit, tell us about what happened to you, and tell us why this subject obviously is so not only deeply personal, but so important for you to share with others.
Sure. Well, I guess, you can tell from my accent that I'm Australian, although I'm now living in the USA, in a beautiful place at the base of the Rocky Mountains in Wyoming, which also is an extraordinary story. But my story started back in 1986. I was a member of the Australian ski team, which people find extraordinary because they don't think we have snow in Australia, but we do. And I was a cross-country skier training for the 88 Winter Olympics in Calgary. I had everything. I had the world at my feet. I was driven. I was determined to really put Australia on the map and to show the world that an Aussie could ski. I had been invited by the Canadian ski team coach to join up with the Canadian team in preparation for the Olympics. So, I was on a high. I set out on a training bike ride. A warm autumn day. I was riding from Sydney to the Blue Mountains. It was about a 6-hour ride, and I got into the ride, the last 10 minutes of the ride actually, going up the hills into the Blue Mountains, and I looked up and saw the sun shining in my face, and that was my last memory, and that was the moment that my life changed in the most extraordinary way. I'd been hit by a speeding truck with, as I said, only 10 minutes to go on the bike ride, and suffered extensive and life-threatening injuries. Those injuries included, breaking my neck and my back in 6 places, 5 ribs, my collarbone, my arm, head injuries, internal injuries, massive blood loss. I actually don't have any recollection of the accident because I had left my body, and I write about that in my latest book very briefly. It's not something that I've talked about a lot in the past because it was an experience that was, that I really didn't understand. I say that for 10 days, while they told my parents, I was airlifted to a spinal ward, and for the first 10 days I was in intensive care. They told my parents that I wouldn't survive. The breaks, the broken bones were one thing. It was the blood loss. They couldn't stop it. They couldn't contain it. And I just told my parents to just, expect the worst. I drifted in and out of my body. I remember looking down and thinking, well, I don't want to go back to that body. That's a broken body, and it can no longer serve me. And after 10 days, for reasons that I wasn't sure about at the time, I did decide to come back to my body, and that's really where my journey and my spiritual journey, I say, begins. And I came back to a broken body and a life of disability and spent almost 6 months in the spinal ward.
Janine,
I think it's everyone's worst nightmare.
Undoubtedly. You were such a competitive person to begin with. When you received the news about what had happened to your body, beyond being probably in a state of shock, do you remember, did your competitive juices immediately start flowing, or did you have to regroup, and was it a real catharsis for you?
I think it was both. I think it was up and down. It was like a roller coaster. At first, they told my parents not to tell me the extent of my injuries because they thought I would give up. And so, coming back and waking up and seeing my father's face looking down at me, I remember at first it was confusion. Why am I back in my body? Because I came back to this body and the pain was excruciating, all-consuming. You can imagine. The truck hit me in my back, ripped out part of my buttocks. My whole torso was bruised and swollen. It was black, really. And I was lying on a thin, hard spinal bed because of all the breaks in my neck and my back. I had to be stable and immobilized. And it was excruciating. So that time in the spinal ward was... It was almost 6 months, as I said, and it was a time that was, at times I was up and I thought, they're wrong, I'm going to walk again, I'm going to get my life back, I'm going to the Olympics. And then, of course, there were times when it was an incredible low and, I thought, what am I doing back here and why did I make this decision? But when I did leave the spinal ward, it was in a wheelchair, my whole body was in a plaster body cast, attached to a catheter bottle. I couldn't walk, I couldn't move my legs, and I just remember the nurse telling me that, that I would get ready, you will get depressed, you'll realize how different your life is when you get home. The rehabilitation doctor had told me that I would never be able to do the things I did before, and I just remember driving out my wheelchair in the back of my father's car and thinking, no, they're wrong. This is the sort of thing that happens to someone else. I'm going to get my life back. And, of course, that, I did, but not in the way that I could have anticipated.
What about the reaction, I'm curious, of your loved ones, your family, your friends? Were they sort of not in denial with you? I know they must have been supportive, but tell us about the support that you got or didn't get.
Well, I was very blessed, unlike some people that go through experiences like this that perhaps might not have the support that I had, but my parents were incredible. In fact, for the whole 6 months, they were in the hospital every single day. My mother used to go home. As you can appreciate, hospital food is terrible. And she used to go home, cook a meal, and bring it back the next morning. And of course, I couldn't eat. By the time I left hospital, there was nothing of me. But she did that every day in the hope that I could at least get down a few mouthfuls of food that was nourishing and food that I liked. And she would sit by my bed all day and read for me, or rub my feet, even though I didn't have any feeling in my legs. Just brush my hair, whatever it was. Dad would go to work, come back, and I had. My friends are incredible. I mean, they would come every single day. They would line up at first when they weren't allowed to see me in intensive care, but they would wait and leave messages for me and notes for me. And, I was very blessed in that way.
What about, and again, when you see yourself in a full body cast and your life has been defined by athleticism or a large part of it, undoubtedly you went through a variety of hope, depression, sadness, anxiety. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us about that sort of emotional journey that you went through.
You're right. It is a roller coaster, and I remember the first time actually in the gym in the hospital when they stood me up for the first time, and I saw this emaciated body covered in a plaster cast, and I remember just looking at myself and thinking, who is that? This once strong, powerful body that I had was diminished, and it was a shocking experience. So, as I said, despite that, there were moments that were also filled with joy. You take so much in life for granted. I remember the first time when my father wheeled me outside in my wheelchair. Just the simple experience of having sun in my face was extraordinary. There were also things that happened in the spinal ward that were very profound. A lot of people ask me how I coped, and I say, well, there were experiences there that really did, were a gift to me. For example, at one point when I was very, very down in the spinal ward and just, they really couldn't pull me out of this dark place that I was in, they decided to move me to another ward next to a girl called Maria, who was the most highly disabled person. We'd heard about her. I was a little nervous, actually, when they said they were moving me next to her. And they did so because they thought that it would be good for her because we were both similar in age. She'd been in a terrible accident and was a quadriplegic. She could only move her head. She'd woken up on her 18th birthday to the news that that was how she was going to spend the rest of her life. So they moved me next to her, and what I didn't know at the time was this wasn't a gift for her. It was actually a gift for me, because I couldn't feel sorry for myself. All I had to do is, look in the bed next to me, and there was Maria. And she, the whole time, and mind you, we stayed in contact up till a few years ago when she finally passed on and left her body. She never complained. And she only smiled. She was always smiling, always happy, which is extraordinary, if you can even imagine. If there was anyone that had a right to complain, it would be her. So that was an incredible gift, and she gave me I call my gift, which was a gift of acceptance, because I always thought, gosh, my accident, my injuries could have been so much worse.
Well, if you just joined us,
there were experiences like that were incredible help to me.
If you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio. A great talk going here with Janine Shepherd, an inspirational speaker and writer of books. And they've become classics in the survivor genre. As you can imagine, she is a pilot and aerobatics instructor. Very happy doing that. Mother of 3 wonderful children, and was awarded the Order of Australia, the nation's highest honor, for her service to her community, the inspiration she provides in her work in raising awareness of spinal cord research. Janine, as you look on it now and the work that you're doing now, share with us a little bit about what you actually do today, and tell us a little bit about the enjoyment you get out of being a pilot and an instructor.
Well, I mean, that, and I love the fact that you said you're at in the flight deck. I can relate to that. So yes. I guess my story, for those who don't, not familiar with it, is, I left hospital. I was in a wheelchair, and I got to the point where, I wondered why I'd made this decision to come back to my body. And I realized that I had a choice, that I could stay down or, as I say, get up and embrace all of the challenges in my life, because I had made a choice to come back to my body. And when I'd made that decision, that's when my life changed. And I was sitting outside in my wheelchair, and my plaster body cast, and an airplane flew over, and I looked up and thought, maybe I can't walk, but maybe I can fly. And it seemed crazy and unlikely, and everybody thought it was ridiculous. And, of course, that moment changed my life. My mum and a friend drove me up to the local airport, and they lifted me in my plaster body cast into a light aircraft for what they call a discovery flight. And I couldn't use my legs, but I could use my hands, and the instructor let me fly. And that moment, changed my life, and I say flying gave me my life back. I didn't know where it was going to lead to at the time, but suddenly I had a dream, something to get me out of bed every morning. And with that motivation, I, did learn to walk again, albeit with a limp, and I still have all the injuries that go along with spinal cord injury. But I am walking, and I did learn to fly. I got my private license, learned to navigate and flew an aircraft around Australia, got a commercial license, my instructor rating, and found myself back at that same school where I'd gone for that first flight, teaching other people how to fly, and, it was extraordinary. I just couldn't believe it. I'd never wanted to fly in my life before. So, I then learnt to do aerobatics and became an aerobatics flying instructor. And I have to say, and that was in around 18 months after I'd left the spinal ward. So it was an extraordinary journey. The doctor said I'd never have children. I went on and became a mum of 3 children, and many other challenges happened in my life. And, I've written about many of those. And one of those was, I got married, I had children, of course, and then my marriage broke down due to some very sad circumstances. And I then became a single mum, with a disability, looking after 3 kids. And so much had happened in my life. I came to America, I gave my TED Talk, and I think the sort of the motivation to move to America came when I was sitting at home and wondering, well, what's the next chapter in my life look like? And I remember opening my computer, and there was an email there from a man from India. At this stage, I was getting emails from all around the world from people that had seen my talk. And it went something like this. He said, "Dear Miss Shepherd, I have had an ailment for 19 years. It was so bad that I was considering suicide." He said, "But I saw your talk today," and he said, "and my life starts now." He said, "Pray for me." And it was this moment where I realized that, in sharing my story and speaking and traveling and writing and hearing other people's stories, that had been such a huge part in my healing experience. I'd been given so much in opening up and being a part of this journey that, I say is the common human experience. And I realized then that, that's what I love doing. I loved speaking and meeting and sharing my story and feeling that I've been able to turn something tragic into something that's triumphant. And so I packed my bags and I moved across the world, and that's why I'm here. That's where I find myself now, having written this new book, Defiant, and living in the country on the other side of the world.
If I look for pictures of you, I see someone that is not only incredibly joyful, but someone that is living a very robust life, is incredibly mobile. Tell me about your mobility. It's extraordinary to me.
Well, it is. For a lot of people, they, as I said, I am walking, and I do walk with a limp, and there are some days that are harder than others because I do suffer from chronic pain. And, there's an interesting story about that too. I do keep very mobile. I keep moving, and I exercise as much as I can. Mainly, I can't run or do the things I did before, but I can swim. I can actually ride a bike. And I just try to keep my body as flexible as possible. And people ask me a lot about how I live with chronic pain and the challenges that come with having a disability. And I love to tell the story about, when I left hospital, they thought that my right arm had healed because my right arm had been in plaster for months while I was in hospital. And so 6.5 years after I'd left, I'd been flying and teaching people how to fly. And then I was pregnant with my first child, and my right arm started to hurt. And I went to the doctor and said, look, maybe we should have this looked into, and maybe it's a stress fracture. And she said, no, it's probably just strained. And, to cut a long story short, my right arm was still broken. I'd actually left hospital with a broken arm, but it wasn't, I had so many other injuries that it had just gone unnoticed. They thought that it had healed. So I had to go and have surgery for that arm. And I had lived for 6.5 years and flown with that right arm while it was broken. Wow. Isn't that extraordinary? And it had always hurt. But the thing is, I was so focused on flying and on getting my life back that I didn't notice it.
I want you to come teach me how to fly.
Okay, it's a date.
It's not that far from where I am to where you are.
And take an airplane up. But you've got to go upside down, of course. That's the best way to fly.
Oh, doing it upside... Oh, I bet you love doing that, don't you?
Yeah, aerobatics is a great way to fly. It's enjoyable. It also makes better pilots, I believe.
Indeed. What again? You're doing so much right now. Anything in particular beyond the book in terms of any kind of a special project that you have planned for the near future?
Well, there are many things, of course, and I just know how quickly life can change. So I try not to hold on to my plans too tightly because, things do change from day to day. I travel back and forth to Australia, of course, for speaking engagements. We're launching Defiant over there in next month, and I go back there and see my beautiful children who are all at university now, so they're all doing their own thing. And my passion is to share my story and to reach out so people understand, most importantly, that they're not alone, that we're all going through this together. And it really isn't about me, it's about we. And that's what I love doing.
Well, it is a fascinating story and a tremendous book, and just the all of it. It'll be completed once again when you and I go up in the air together. But her name is Janine Shepherd, author of extraordinary new work called Defiant: A Broken Body is Not a Broken Person, published by Sounds True. She is also seeing her on CNN, multiple other things, including the TED Talks, one of which was in Kansas City. Janine, how can people find out more about, not only get a copy of the book, but also maybe some of the writing and some of the appearances and some of the things that you're up to?
Well, they can go to my website, which is JanineShepherd.com, and there's lots of information there, links to buy the book, links to my TED Talk, and other, bits and pieces that they might find interesting. And, of course, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and, I just love hearing from people and also hearing their stories as well.
Well, again, thank you so much. You're an inspiration to so many, and thanks for sharing time with us here today. Best of luck on your trip back home to Australia, and I would love to have you on again sometime.
Thank you, Warner, and have a lovely day.
You too. We'll be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.